There has been a lot of focus put on public consultation with regards to major decisions. Uh, where do you see the balance being between consultation, recommendation, and implementation with regards to the separation of public input and political decisions?
Well, ultimately, of course, council makes the decisions. That's what we're elected to do. The way that the governance process works in Canada, Alberta, and right here at our own local governance level, is that we represent people, that we elect people and ask them to make decisions on our behalf and in our best interests. The way that Hinton Town Council has chosen to operate is we have citizens advisory committees in all major areas that we do business in. So whether it's policing, which we've introduced a new Citizens Advisory Committee in 2009, or whether it's recreation, culture, family, community support services, we have groups of citizens that come together, look at the issues of the day, and try to keep an overarching focus on that particular area of need that they volunteered to serve in, and then they give advice to council. Council also gets advice from administration on various matters, and then council's job, I would suggest, is to take the advice that we get from administration, to get the input we have from our citizens advisory committees, and also bring our own perspective and input that we gather in our roles of being out engaging the community on a daily basis as well, and then make decisions in the best interest of the community as a whole. So we've been involved very strategically and very deliberately in inviting citizens to get engaged in the decision-making process. We're doing this through things as our website, www.hinton.ca, where we put out various plans that are being asked for public feedback and input. We do it through polling, we do it through gathering information, public open house sessions, through newsletters, and through articles in the various print media around the community. And what we're looking for is for groups of citizens to come together, have a look at various plans that they might have an interest in, and give us feedback. And then we take that feedback as part of the decision-making information we need to make a good decision. And a really good example, I think, in 2009 of citizen feedback, some might think of as a negative exercise, but I thought was absolutely what the council needed to hear, was when a group of citizens started pushing back about the Beaver Boardwalk build-out. The Beaver Boardwalk is something that's beloved by our community. I've heard folks from within and around our community speak in just such glowing terms about what a novel concept, what a great idea, what a beautiful place to spend time, and what just a fantastic enterprise. Again, proposed by local private interests, built by volunteers with some support from the town. But when they went to phase 3, some of the folks started thinking and saying that it was going too far, that there was a potential negative impact on the fish and on some of the migratory birds, and a potential negative impact on the lake itself. And they were suggesting that we do a couple of things. One, shut the Beaver Boardwalk down, or two, at least put it on a temporary hiatus until breeding seasons were over and things like this, and study the problem, or what they perceived to be a problem. What they were proposing was a problem and an issue. Council took this advice, gave it a lot of consideration, and in the end decided, well, we weren't going to shut the Beaver Boardwalk down or even put it on hiatus. We were going to stop building. That we built it out, that was as far as it needed to go, that we had a wonderful project, and it was time to thank the volunteers for their time and appreciate their effort, and start enjoying what we have. And so I think we struck a balance there, and usually when you get two sides of the argument that are not happy, that's usually a pretty good indicator that you found a middle ground that's agreeable to what the needs of the citizens are. So a good example of public feedback that was listened to. Another one I'd suggest is the Highway 16 signs.
The other follow-up question just to that, Mayor Taylor. What was the deciding factor in, you had all this feedback, you had all these anecdotal concerns.
Yes.
What was the deciding factor in not regressing?
The deciding factor, and while I can't speak for my fellow colleagues on council, I can reflect some of the discussion that council had. But essentially it came down to a couple of things. One, the professionalism and passion, I would suggest, of Dr. Rick Bonar and the people that were involved in the project from a builder's perspective. We had two very well accredited, very well recognized wildlife biologists that were volunteering on that project and leading the project, who gave us some pretty strong advice that it was not a negative impact on the biology of that area. Also based on our own observations and volunteers and general discussions with the community, we didn't do a scientific study. We didn't commission people or go out and get consultants to come in and talk to us. What we did do is make an intuitive decision based on the best advice we had of people that we trusted. And people will probably argue for years to come whether that was the right way to proceed or not, but we feel comfortable with our decision. And the decision not to proceed was also based on feedback we were getting from the public as well. So a balance of opinions, and in the end, we believe the people that built it and the experience and background that they brought to the project were of enough value to also believe that they weren't doing anything to harm the environment.
One of the other news stories of 2009 that could be an ongoing news story of the year for years to come was the detection of pine beetle within the town of Hinton boundaries. What are your thoughts on the year to come? And not just with pine beetle, with the entire forestry industry. They have the black liquor subsidy possibly coming to town. What are some of your thoughts?
Well, in order to answer that question, Tyler, I'm going to have to take a step back, because give maybe a little bit of background on where the pine beetle concern came from and what we've been doing that's brought us to 2010 and beyond. As you know, I also chair the Grand Alberta Economic Region, which is a regional body that encompasses our friends and neighbors that work together to look after regional economic interests. So about 6 years ago, we identified a challenge that was happening in British Columbia. When the mountain pine beetles were infecting the forests in British Columbia, we were looking at what was happening in those communities that were losing their industry as a result of this beetle infestation in the forests. At that time, we hired some consultants through funds that we achieved from the provincial government and federal government, and we also brought in some partnership funds from folks like Whitecourt and Edson, Grand Cache, Drayton Valley, Jasper, people that shared this concern. And we started doing research on the impacts of the mountain pine beetle if it was to come to our region, because we're very much a forest-based economy here in the Hinton region. What we learned was that it could potentially be devastating to the economy. Much like a agricultural community that relies on cattle or swine or various crops, when they get flooded out, when the cattle get sick, when the swine get a disease, it can have absolutely devastating impacts on the economy of those regions that are based in those types of areas. For us, it's predominantly forestry. And if the forests got sick, what would happen to our community was the questions that we were asking. As a result of these studies and continuing to monitor what's been going on in British Columbia, we've learned that entire communities are losing their industry in British Columbia. Small towns like Mackenzie, just north of Prince George, are virtually economically dead. Of course, they're not giving up easily, and they're trying to fight to find out what their future is, but they've lost their industry that they were born based on. Prince George is another area where they lost the Prince George Golf and Country Club, a venerable golf and country club and an economic driver in their city. As a result of losing the forest, they lost their golf club as well. So there's various impacts to various communities. So what we did was went out and commissioned a couple of studies about the potential impact. Based on what we learned from those, we started working with our individual member municipalities to help them develop a diversification strategy for what would happen if the industry was to leave their communities. Now it grew just from the mountain pine beetle effects. What we started to find out was the agricultural communities are seeing a heck of a challenge, whether it was mad cow, whether it was what was happening with the swine flu and the challenges in the pork industry, whether it was happening with the dearth of crops being bought in the crop industry and the feed industry. Everybody's facing a challenge. Jasper's facing a downturn in tourism since 9/11 and some of the challenges that they're having with the economy, and the tourists aren't coming. Coal mining was taking a bit of a hit there for a while, although thankfully it's on the rebound. And then of course oil and gas went away. As we all know, in Alberta, the oil and gas economy has pretty much depressed over the past 2 years, and so we're starting to see that come home. Every one of our communities has some kind of a financial challenge that's facing them today. So we've been working with them to develop diversification strategies and how can your community adapt and thrive in the future if you were to lose your major industry? We don't have the answers to those yet right now because we're actually engaging the community in answering those questions. We've hired consultants at the Grand Alberta Economic Region. They're working with each one of our communities to talk to them about what they see their community doing and possibly becoming if they were to have to change the economy that their community has been based on. So 2010 is going to be an interesting year of not only learning what it is Hinton thinks it can be in the future, but also council understanding what we can do to help support that vision becoming more achievable. One of the challenges of economic diversification is everybody during the down times says, why didn't you do something about it when times were good? But during the good times, nobody's interested in talking to you about what would happen if and how can we change our economy, because everybody's busy, everybody's working, everybody's making a buck. And those that aren't are falling so far behind that nobody's listening. So there's this whole challenge of getting people to understand what could happen, like the boy that cried wolf, and if wolf never happens, nobody's paying attention. Yet when it does, why didn't you do something about it previously?